was not a Christian man by any way, so to speak. My grandfather was a man who understood people and saw them for what they really were. He had a very difficult relationship with God, but that is because a lot of things happened to him in his life that kind of, I don't want to say questioned his belief in God. But my grandfather was really cool to the point of where he could see angels and he could see demons. But when I asked him what a demon actually looked like, he said it's not the way people imagine them to look. Like, they look like normal people. They don't have horns, they don't have like long pointy tails, they don't have like little staffs, like little pitchforks, They look like normal people, only except they have like really dark eyes and they hurt people. With angels, that's a different story, because a lot of the stories that he writes, they're true stories, they're actual fact, because I touch things and I can see it. And one of the stories that he talks about is about a girl that he had loved way before my grandmother, which, people would think that, grandparents just meet each other and they're like, that's, you don't know anything else before that. But I didn't know anything about him and his previous girlfriends. Apparently he only had one, and that her name was Alisha. Alisha wasn't really her name, but that was the name that she used to, basically when she moved. So the story of Alisha is pretty sad. And so she was a year older than him, which he thought was so damn sexy. I mean, a year older, and she, according to him, she had like this beautiful, actually, I had like a spiritual encounter with her, so I know what she looked like then. But she had this beautiful, long, kind of curly black hair, kind of brownish black hair. She had these beautiful, piercing blue eyes, really beautiful skin. And she had a high school diploma, and she had big dreams. She wanted to go places, and she wanted to get married and have a good job and have a family. And unfortunately, her family life, her mom was dead when she was 5. Her mom died when she was 5. And her dad was drunk, and he beat the hell out of her all the time. And that's the way my grandfather phrased it. He beat the hell out of her. And her brother, who was 6 or 7 years older than her, was very sexually abusive towards her. And, she felt really bad, and she felt awful about it. And so she went to a cathedral, basically, to a Catholic priest, and tried to get help. And he ended up, sexually abusing her more. And my grandfather got wind of this. So my grandfather knew of her, basically, because she was a friend, from what I understand, was a friend of my Aunt Sue's. Now, I didn't know Sue at all. So I don't know exactly how they met or whatever. So I don't know whatever, but it was really, he mentioned summer of 1945 is really when he began this kind of whole love affair, I guess, with her. And he sees her in the church first, and he goes over and, he gives her hard candy to eat, and she's like, thanks. She knows who he is, like, very, very well. Like, she knows who he is. And so he goes, and he kind of has a weird feeling about her. And the next day, like, he sees her, and she's going into the church, and he waits outside. And I remember him telling me this. I said, why would you do that, Grandpa? He says, because I had a weird feeling about her going into that church. And usually when my grandfather had a weird feeling or a bad feeling about something, he was always right. And so she would come out of the church, and she'd be crying, like, bawling her eyes out. And he's like, interesting. So she would do this again another time, and funny enough, every time she would go to the church, he'd be there, and he'd wait for her. And finally, he figured he had had enough of this, and he wants to figure out what the hell is going on. So he goes over, and he shakes her hand. Now, my grandfather had this really cool kind of power, as I'd like to call it, where he could shake anybody's hand or touch their arm or hug them or whatever, and he could see anything or know anything about you. And what he wanted to know is what the hell was really going on in that damn church. And he found out what was going on, and he said, I need to pay this man a visit. So he goes into the church, and he says something to me that I understand, because I see this too. When we look at priests or preachers, we can see what they're called the lines of them. And I don't really know how to explain it without sounding weird, but basically he could tell if he was a real priest or not. And this man was clearly not a real priest. So he goes up to him, and, the priest is going, oh, can I pray for you, young man? And my grandfather basically takes his hat off, because, he's a Texan. He has a cowboy hat on, and he says, sir, you better start praying before I tear you limb from limb. And, the priest stops lighting the candles, like, excuse me? And he goes, you leave that girl's body alone. You leave that body to God. That is not your job. And he basically goes, well, you don't know anything about that girl. She needs help. And my grandfather goes, you touch her again, we're going to have an issue. Tips his hat, puts his hat on, tips his hat, walks out the cathedral. Well, my grandfather decides at one point, and then there's a story that he called The Cross and the Bow, which basically is about his first angelic experience. My grandfather was not a Christian man by any means. He did not do the whole Jesus thing, believe me. But he saw angels, I guess you could say. He saw dead folks. He could see dead people, just like I can. And he sees this beautiful woman in the church, and he goes up to her and he has this really interesting experience with her, and she basically tells him that you have the arrow, use it wisely, and he kind of backs out of the church and he falls and he sees Alisha and she's like, oh, hi Billy, and he's scared to death for her because he doesn't want her to see what the hell he just saw. Basically he's like, whatever. So she goes into the church, and she's exactly where the angel was, and and he's trying to look for her, the angel, and she's at the top, with her little bow but no arrows. So he goes over to her and he's like, what the hell are you doing here anyway? And she's like, well, I've sinned, Billy. I need to be forgiven. He's like, no baby, you haven't. Like, that man is lying to you. Do not. And she's like, Billy, I have sinned. I need to ask Father so and so that I need to be forgiven. And the priest comes out, starts calling her name, and my grandfather's very angry. He's trying to like hold her, basically, like, don't go. And she's like, I need to go, like, bye. So the angel appears behind him and says, and whenever he tells these stories, he's always referred to as Elio or Eliach. It's never his real name, because Elio and Eliach are not his name, like, at all. They're not even close to his name. My grandfather's name was Billy Bob, and I know that's Southern, and I know y'all are gonna laugh, and y'all are like, no, is that really his name? Yes, it is. I do have his birth certificate if you want it. It says Billy Bob on it. So anyway, so the angel basically says, Elio, you are right, your suspicions are correct, go to her, save her, basically. So my grandfather's gonna, he's trying to figure out what the hell to do, and he's hearing and he's seeing everything that's going on in that room. He can hear her crying and screaming, I'm sorry, blah, 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 and him touching her. And my grandfather's like, okay, this is not okay. And I think in my grandfather, when he told me this, he said the thing that really got to him, that really, made him like ready to murder this man, was when the priest basically tells her to say you like it, you slut. And my grandfather was like, oh, no, not today, Lord, not on my watch, no. So he's busting through those doors, and he can pinpoint where she is. And he said the door was not locked. I think that was God's luck. And he bust open that door. He said he never grabbed a man so fast and slammed him against that damn wall, he didn't know what hit him. So he has his hand around this man's neck, holding him against the wall, and the arrow that he has, that was given to him by the angel, above his head like this. And of course the priest is laughing at him like, are you going to kill me? And he goes, my grandfather basically screams at him, you are no man of God, how could you do this, blah, 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 I'd rather kill you right now. And so the priest is laughing at him, and he says, what would you want with a slut like this? And my grandfather went, oh, that's enough. And he starts beating the hell out of this man, fists, and he stabs the priest with the arrow. Now, he doesn't kill this man. He critically injures, is what he told me. And, she's crying, she's, whatever. And he's like, come on, beauty, let's get out of here. So he, takes her hand, and she's all upset. How am I going to show my face here now? How's God going to forgive me now? And he basically takes her head, like her chin like this. He goes, you are God's gift to me, and no man is ever going to touch you like that again. Period. Social period. And so she's like, I got to go. And so, he sees everything that's going on at her house, which is another kind of cool thing that my grandfather could do, was see other people's lives. It was really weird, and I don't know how. It was very hard to explain. So anyway, he sees all the abuse, and basically he gets home, and his sister is like, hey, what happened to you? He's like, I tried to beat the hell out of a demon. So, he goes to bed and he can't really sleep because he's hearing and he's seeing everything that's going on at her house. It's very bad, and she's crying, blah, blah, blah. And the next day, he gets up and he's like, all right, well, I'm about to beat a demon today. I'm going to go beat the hell out of people who are hurting her, basically. And so he grabs Phil, he asks his brother Phil for his pistol. This is Texas, 1945. Of course they had pistols. Why not? And so he grabs his pistol and he's on his way and he meets her at a library. And he basically says to her, hey baby, like, can I join you? And she's like, yeah, sure, like, no problem. And basically he touches her arm, he says, by mistake, and he sees everything that went on this morning, and it was bad. And he said, oh, what happened at 10:15 this morning? And she's like, why the specific time? And he's like, what did that boy do to you? And she's like, I gotta go. And she goes to that cathedral again. And she comes out, and luckily she's not crying or anything. And, he's just like, he doesn't let it go. And she's just like, Billy, I gotta go. Like, just don't touch me. I gotta go. Well, this boy appears behind him, and he basically says, you need to get to her now. You need to get to her now. So this boy, my grandfather turns around, and he turns around, back around, and there's a truck right there. And this boy hands him car keys. He says, get in. I'll lead the way. He had never been to Alicia's house before. Ever. He had never been to her house. And for my grandfather told me there was a good reason behind it, because she had never invited anybody to her house because, why not? Because, she was abused at her house and all that crap. So, he's driving out there. And I had been to that house, but it's not there anymore. It's been torn down. But I'd been to that house, and, because he took me there. But, so he's driving out with this boy, and, he's getting ready to get out of the car. And the boy hands him Phil's pistol and says, you'll need it. And he goes, okay, thank you. So he loads, gets ready to shoot the pistol. He, puts the pistol in his pocket, gets out of the car, and he's walking. He sees her brother immediately. Like, he knows who he is. And he's going to walk up to her, and he hears a voice behind him, and it's her. And she's like, Billy, what the hell are you doing here? Like, what are you doing here? And, she's trying to get him to leave, basically. And her brother comes up and is like, can I help you, son? And my grandfather's about to talk, and he looks at his sister, and he's like, who the hell is this? And she's just like, this is Billy, this is Sue's brother. And, he basically tells her to go in the house, and she's a little scared, and he's like, he yells at her to go in the house, so she goes in the house. And my grandfather, according to him, the brother turns around, and he's going to try to, pull out his pistol. Here's one thing that you need to know about my grandfather. My grandfather could load, cock, and shoot a pistol in 0.2 seconds. You try to pull out your pistol, baby, he would have already shot you. He shoots the gun out of his hand. And he says, too slow. And so he walks over to her brother. He says, sir, if I see or hear you ever misusing this girl again, I will end you. And he's serious. And her brother laughs, and he's like, she needs to learn how to respect her elders. Well, my grandfather grabs him by the shirt tail, and he says, you keep your filthy hands off her. Well, actually, first he says she doesn't need to be taught a goddamn thing. You keep your filthy hands off her, and that includes her mouth. And he goes, and then he's laughing, oh, but she feels good, and I've taught her well, and my grandfather starts beating the hell out of him, basically. Okay? Well, the girl comes back out because, she's scared to death because she's hearing punches and shit, and so she's coming back out, and the angel basically holds her, and it's like, basically holds her in his arms, like, trying to keep her calm, so she's not getting in the middle of it, so she doesn't get hurt. Well, then he gets up, and they hear a shot. They hear gunshots. A couple of them. My grandfather's not hit with these bullets. These bullets, as he told me, were frozen in his face. They just stopped at his face. And he couldn't, what the hell is going on? And he blinks, and the bullets turn right around, shoot the brother. So that was a thing. And then the dad comes out, wondering what the hell is going on. He's got a beer, a beer bottle in his hand. He's drunk as hell. And my grandfather sees the belt that he hits her with. And my grandfather said, I don't know what the hell I was thinking. He grabbed my arm, and I bunched him so hard it knocked him to the ground. And I told him he better keep his hands off her. And they're just dumbfounded, like, this boy is beating the hell out of these men. And of course, the angel, I guess, lets her go, and she's like, Billy, I think you better go. So she he goes home, and he's like, I really don't want to leave you. And she's like, just go, please, just go. So he goes home, and he gets, and he's at dinner, and he's seeing all the repercussions, unfortunately, that happens to her because of him. She's raped, she's beaten. It's not great. And my grandfather basically tells his mother, Mama, you better pray to God I don't commit murder tonight. And his mama looks at him and, she knows. And she goes, that girl, why? And he goes, Mama, it could be Gwen, Betty Jean, or Sue. Those are his sisters. And she said, I pray for you, my son. And she basically tells Phil to go with him, And Phil basically hands my grandfather his car keys and his pistol and his knife. And he says, you go save her. So he gets in the car, and the boy that he saw earlier gets in the car and says, I know where she is. And my grandfather says, I know where she is too. She's at Trinity Park, which is a beautiful park in Fort Worth. And she's laying there on the ground. She's beaten badly, doesn't look good at all. She's crying, thinking it's her dad. And, he's like, no, Alisha, it's me. So she sits up and, he sits down. And, the first thing out of her mouth is, what do you want from me, Billy? What do you want from me? What do you want me to do for you? I'll be a good girl for you. What do you want? And he's like, babe, like, nothing? Like, I'm here to help you? Like, he's so confused. He's like, the fuck? Like, he doesn't understand what, and then she goes, and he writes this down. She goes, do you want me to suck you off a little? He's like, whoa, damn it, no. He's like, I'm here to help you. Like, I'm here to help. Like, what do you need from me? And she basically says, I need to get out of this town because it'll kill me. And he basically says, how much you need? And she basically says, I don't understand. He goes, how much do you need? And she goes, just $20 so I can get a bus out of here. He goes, I'll do you one better. So he pulls into his what he called a billfold, basically a wallet. He pulls out his wallet. He pulls out $400 cash. And he hands it to her. That's cash, okay? That's cash money, okay? That's $400.45. That's a lot of money. So he hands it to her. And she's like, no, Billy, I can't take this from you. He goes, yes, you can. You're going to need a place to live. You're going to need to pay rent. You're going to need food. You're going to need clothes. You're going to need, you're going to need things. And he has an idea. He says, okay, come with me. So they basically have this whole conversation first about, when the abuse started and all this crap. And it started when she was real young and, blah, 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 blah. And he's just like, okay, I'm angry. Like, I need to, we're getting you out. So basically the plan was that they were going to get married at the all-night chapel. And they were going to move. And that plan was very, very easily derailed. Very easily derailed by his brother Phil. So he takes her to the home. His mom is sewing. And he asks his mom if Gwen is home. Gwen is the oldest girl, and Gwen happens to be home. And he goes into Gwen's room, and all Gwen just has to do is look at my grandfather, and she knows. She goes, is she here? What does she need? And he goes and he gets her, and she looks at her, and she goes, oh baby, come on baby, come on honey, let's get you cleaned up. So gets her cleaned up, and my grandfather describes how he catches the bathroom door, and she is the first time he sees her, quote, exposed, naked basically, and Gwen is helping her tend to her wounds and all that. And he goes into the living room, and Phil comes through the door. He's panicking. He says Bill, that her brother is running around town like a lunatic trying to find her with a gun. He's going to shoot her. She's got to get out of town tonight, like today, like it needs to happen now. And he goes, I've already cabled a woman, she's a widow, in Amarillo, and she is willing to take her if she takes her today, like tonight. And my grandfather says, Amarillo, that's far enough. So he goes into the kitchen, he's angry, and his mom says, what can we do to help her, basically? So her mom starts making her sandwiches and stuff like that, and, she gives her $200. So basically she has $600 in her pocket, which is a lot of money than what she had. And Gwen gives her clothes and shoes and her suitcase, and makes her look pretty. And, her mom does her hair and puts makeup on her, makes her look presentable. So they all head out the door. And, my grandfather originally is not going to go to the station with them because, he just can't take it. He's letting the love of his life go. And she wants him to go with her. So, they're in the car. They're in the back. He, places his hand on her hand. It's, really cute. And Phil is giving instructions. This is the woman you're meeting. This is what you need to do. Blah, 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 blah. This is the train you need to get on. Blah, blah, blah. So when they get to the station, Gwen goes and buys the ticket. It's a sleeper train, so she can sleep on the train. Great, because it's a 4-hour, and it's about 8:30 at night. So she's going to get there about midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning. So she's going to be tired. So, my grandfather's crying. And, my grandfather's trying not to cry because, he loves this woman so much. And oh my God, so sweet. So she says, I want you to do something for me. And he's thinking, go with you. Yes, of course. Like, I'm ready to go. And, he gives, she shares this kind of like his first kiss with her. And I think that's really sweet. And, he lets her go. And he's all upset and he screams, when she leaves, and feels like, no, Bill, she's going to be fine. She's going to be happier. She's going to be safer. Well, they're heading home, and my grandfather says, we need to make a stop. So they make a stop at a bar, and there's her brother raging like a lunatic, saying, telling all the men that his sister can, basically suck them off, basically. And Gwen is, this is where I love my late Aunt Gwen. Gwen is not okay with this. So she goes, so basically when they get there, the brother's raging like a lunatic, basically like saying to all the men who's there, you're young men too. They're not like old men. They're like young men. They're like, my sister can, suck you up basically. And he tries to shoot my grandfather, but Phil pulls out his pistol first because Phil is also very quick with a pistol. And he says, I don't think you want to do that, son. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, where's that whore of a sister of mine? She could give you all, she could get your rocks off, frankly. Gwen does not take this very well. This is what I love about Gwen in this story. She goes over to him, she takes his head, and she slams it into the table. And she says, you talk of her again, I've got 3 brothers who will take care of you and your tiny dick. She is a lady, you sick fuck. And his nose is bleeding, like she beats him hard. And she goes, come on, brothers, let's go home. And they're just like, Gwen! Like, oh my God, okay. Gwen, all right. So, my grandfather, he goes home and he's crying, he loves her so much, and they get a notice in the morning that she made it, she's fine, she was, they get a call in the morning, I think, from the woman saying, oh, she's so tuckered out, she's sleeping, she's fine, she's sweet, she's adorable, she's beautiful. So my grandfather gets on the phone, he says, I have one request for you, if I'm allowed to come up and see her and to keep in touch. And she says, oh, she would love that, yes. So they do, they, exchange like little telegrams and little notes here and there, and he comes up and sees her every now and then, and, she's happy. And one time he comes up, she's like, I want to share a night with you. And my grandfather's gone, okay, like, sure, we'll just cuddle. He just assumes they're just going to cuddle and lay there and talk, and that's not what she had in mind, obviously not. My grandfather has 2 accounts of this story. He has one that's very bland, very like, oh, I just took off her dress and it was fine and her back was divine, that kind of thing. Then he gets to the very detailed, very smutty version of this story, and I'm reading this going, oh man, okay, all right, why didn't you include this in the original? It's very, very wild. It's very, very passionate, believe me. However, he does say he does not shove himself between her, which I can understand why. So, but he does other things. But anyway, so they have they have a lovely time together, and, they keep writing and keep in touch. And then, so she's going to church with the woman because, the woman is very Catholic, and she's like, the best thing I can do to earn my keep is go to church with this woman, okay? I don't want to say that I don't believe in God, that kind of thing. So she goes, and the first priest is very old and very boring, and she's like, it's fine. She has friends in the church, like, everything's great. And then comes this priest, who is 31, very dashing, very good looking. He has a very bad obsession with her. And my grandfather is kind of aware of this a little bit, because of the way that she writes her telegrams. And she writes one telegram basically saying, I need you to come up, I'm very worried, this priest is getting too close to me. He's already seen me in my nightgown a few times. Like, I get sick around him sometimes. Like, I don't know why. There are times where I black out around him and I don't know why. And, I just don't understand. Like, he's getting too close to me. Too close for comfort. My grandfather basically cables her back and he says, baby, I'll take care of it. Like, I'm on my way, baby, I'll take care of it. So he goes and, he, gets up there and he says, I'm headed to the church. And she goes, do not do anything that will have me excommunicated. He goes, baby, I need to take care of it. Like, if I need to have a decent conversation with this man, I need to let him know that he is not to be near you, basically. Okay. Well, he goes, and before he even gets into the church, a woman basically says, Elio, you need to be careful. He is a very dangerous man. He's already done things to her. He's going to hurt her. Be careful. He will hurt you. Just be careful. And my grandfather goes, oh, fuck. Like, he already knows he's going to have to fight this man. He already knows he's going to have to beat the hell out of this man. There is no conversation part of this. So he goes into the church, and the priest is, I guess he's expecting him. It's weird. And he goes, oh, you must be Billy. Fuck. And my grandfather's just like, oh, fuck. Like, this guy? Like, really? Like, really? Like, this dude? And he's like, how are you? So nice to meet you. As soon as he's shaking my grandfather's hand, he's seeing everything that this man has already done to Alisha. And he's angered by this. He's not okay with this. And then the priest notices that he has the arrow in his hand. He goes, oh, that's the arrow of Saint Irene. Oh my goodness, how do you have that? And my grandfather's just going, like, he, in his mind, he's already like, I gotta fight this man. Damn. Like, I thought I was gonna have a decent conversation with this man. God damn it. Like, he's already like, really? In a church? Like, again? Like, really? So the priest pulls out a knife, and he's basically gonna try to kill my grandfather with it. My grandfather stabs him first with the arrow. And so they start beating the hell out of each other, basically. And, you know, he gets punched, the other guy gets punched, and then they stop. My grandfather, you know, wipes his nose off, you know, basically like, are you done? You gonna keep your mitts off her? And the priest basically goes over to this, he called it a torchlight. It's this really long, thick, like lamp kind of thing. It's a really big stand. And it looks really heavy. And it looks like if you were hit with it, you could die, basically. Or you could get very critically injured. And he basically says that it's going to come a time where that girl is going to be his, and she's going to do everything he wants her to do. And, you know, my grandfather won't be around to live to tell the tale. And my grandfather's going, fuck, like, I'm about to die. Well, as he says in the story, he hears the name Elio, and he turns, and he sees this thing flying at him. And as soon as this guy is about to slam my grandfather with it, he grabs this sword. It's a sword. It's a double-edged sword, which I think is fucking epic. And he's, you know, the guy's going to slam it, and he stops him. And he basically, you know, the priest says, that girl is mine. And he basically says, over my holy body. Not my dead body, my holy body. And he, you know, pushes him back. And they start, you know, like, battling it out. And then he realizes that the priest is hit with, like, an arrow. And he pulls the arrow out. Well, he looks up to his sides, and he sees, you know, things shooting arrows at him. And then, you know, the priest is going to hit my grandfather again with this thing. And the priest is punched from the side. And he looks, and he's terrified of what he sees, because he sees all these angels around my grandfather who are ready to fight this man. And, you know, this angel whispers into my grandfather's ear, finish him, Elio. Just finish him. So my grandfather beats the hell out of him real bad. And he basically grabs this priest by his shirt, and he says, you touch her, you die. That's not negotiable, sir. I don't care if it's murder. You touch her, or you lay a hand on her, or you even look at her, I swear to God, you are dead. And he, like, you know, he lets him go, and he, like, runs away, and he's like, you know, blah, blah, blah. And my grandfather, like, wipes his nose, he turns around, he sees all these people, and he's like, and, you know, I thought it was so cool. And just the way that he describes it is just, like, so epic. And they're like, it's okay. You've dealt for it for now. Go home to her. She's worried. I said, okay. So he goes home, and she's like, what the hell did you do? I took care of it. You took care of it? What? Why are you bleeding? And what is with you? And she's like, why are you bruised? I took care of it. It's fine. Am I being excommunicated? No, you were fine. But baby, let me tell you something. That man is dangerous. He's going to try to hurt you. I want you to hide in the back. I want you to avoid him. Do not go anywhere with that man alone. Do not. Do you understand me? She goes, why do you know this? She goes, do you understand me? I am not losing you to this man. Do you understand me? And she goes, yeah. He goes, okay. And then they have a nice night together, and, you know, passionate lovemaking, if you will. Anyway, so he goes home, and, you know, they keep writing. And then she tells him that, you know, oh, there's this Bible study that they're going to have. And my grandfather's like, baby, I don't want you going to that. And she's like, I don't want to go either, but the woman who I'm living with, Mabel, which is her name, says you should go because, you know, you're going to meet a lot of people and, you know, blah, blah, blah. My grandfather doesn't hear from her at all after that. It wasn't really a Bible study at all. So I'll tell you about it in just a second. So my grandfather is very worried because he hasn't heard from her in about a week. And he cables her to make sure she's okay. There's no answer. He calls the woman, and basically she says that, you know, she's not home basically all the time that he calls her. And so he's very worried. He panics, and he can't see her. Like, his vision of her is blacked. He can't see her. He doesn't know where she is. And he cables Gwen, and he basically says, can you check on her, please, to see if she's all right? God, okay. So Gwen cables him back the next day, and it basically says, Bill, I think you need to come home. It's not Mama, but I think you need to come home. And he knew. It just, in his heart, he said, in my heart sank, like he knew. So he goes home to Fort Worth, and Gwen meets him at the station. She says, we have to go to the morgue. And they bring her out, basically, And as he said, they undid the sheet, and there the beauty was, dead. And my grandfather looked, at the county commissioner, basically, or I guess the guy, he said the county commissioner, but I don't really know if that's what he was actually called. But he looks at him, and he basically says, what do you think happened? They said, oh, they think it's a hit-and-run accident. And my grandfather looked, and he said, no, I don't think so. And he puts all he had to do was put his hand on her arm, and he saw it all. So basically what happened is the Bible study was not really a Bible study. It was basically to get her to the church, basically. And so she gets there, and she thinks, oh, I'm a little early, or nobody's here. And this priest, comes from behind her and puts this cloth over her mouth. Well, he's trying to chloroform her, basically. However, the chloroform that he is using is laced with legal and illegal drugs, like very bad drugs. So like cocaine, meth, LSD, like all these mixed into one. Not a good combination. And she is inhaling these, and she's screaming, she's crying, she's screaming, she's trying to get away from him. But he's got her pinned down so much that she can't move, and she's inhaling these drugs, and she overdoses. And so she dies. And I think it took the priest about 10 minutes to figure out what he had done to her. And he knew he had to get rid of her, because, oh my God, a priest murdering a girl? Scandal, right? So he puts her in a blanket, wraps her in a blanket, puts her in his car, drives out about 10, 15 miles out from the church so nobody would see him, takes her out of the blanket, and just plops her on the side of the road. And she's there for about 4 or 5 days until somebody driving stops and looks at her, and she's not decomposed, and she's not dead. She looks dead, obviously, but she doesn't look bad, thankfully. And then she is transferred to the morgue because nobody will ID her. And I think she's there for like 5-6 days, I think, to a week. And then the woman who is looking for her, who she lives with, finally goes to the morgue and IDs her, and basically cables Gwen and says, she's dead. I need to ship her back to Fort Worth because she's from Fort Worth. So Gwen cables, gets the same day. She gets 2 cables at the same day. She gets one from her, and she gets one from my grandfather. And she, the body is quickly shipped, quickly put on something, and she's arrived to the morgue in Fort Worth in Tarrant County. And she is put in a drawer, basically. Not a drawer, but she's put in one of those things. And that's when she cables my grandfather, and the county commissioner, what they call it, the county commissioner, I don't know if that's what they're actually called, but they say, the person's like, would you want to ID her now? And he goes, I need to wait till somebody else is here. Can you give me a day or 2? Yes, thank you. And she's waiting for my grandfather to come home. And that's when she cables him and says, come home. So my grandfather is enraged. He's ready to murder this man, okay? He is ready to murder this man. And he looks at Gwen, after he takes his hand off her arm, and he says, no, Gwen, this is no fatal accident. She was murdered. And Gwen goes, are you sure? He goes, I know. And he looks at the commissioner and goes, do an autopsy on her. I want to see what's in her system. Well, what do you think comes back in her system? Drugs. Drugs in her system. She overdosed. He said, he did this on purpose. He killed her. And I'm going to murder this man. And Gwen says, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to have that on your conscience, and you know that. That's not what she would want, and that's not what I would want. We do not want you to be in jail, period. So they basically the county commissioner basically says we need to look for next of kin. Gwen steps up, says we are next of kin. They take the body home, and my grandfather wraps her in a blanket, puts her in the tub, and he not with water, but just puts her in the tub basically, and he sits with her for like the whole night, crying and sobbing, and this is the most heartbreaking thing in his entire life. She was only 21 too. She was not that old. And he just thought to himself, God, why did you do this to her? Why did you let this happen to her? She did nothing to anybody. And all she wanted to do was have a good job, married, and, a family. And the thing that really made me cry when I heard this is the week that after, like the few days after my grandfather left her there, he started looking at rings. He was going to marry her. He was going to go up and propose to her a few days after, because he had a ring all picked out, and he was going to go give it to her, but she went missing, and then she died, and he could never do it. So he didn't buy the ring, but he had it like picked out. He didn't buy it yet, but he had one in mind that he was going to pick out for her, and he was going to take her away and give her the best life he could, but he didn't. And that really freaking sucks. And my grandfather really had a very difficult time talking about Alisha for a long, long time until I was 14 years old, and then I brought her up, and then we talked about her, and he gave me the whole long story, and then we went to her house, and I had a very spiritual, ghostly encounter with her, and she was very nice, but very kind of, not angry, but very shocked at me that I could see her. And she, she had a last hug with my grandpa, and the thing that she told me is my life was not going to be easy. That life was going to be very challenging for me because of what I could, I guess, see or do. And she said, I would suggest you don't say a goddamn word about it because people are going to think you're nuts and people are not going to understand you and you're just going to try to defend yourself the whole time, which I get. So it was an interesting story. So my grandfather, people would ask, where is she buried? She's not buried. My grandfather did not have an obituary for her, and the reason why he did not is because he said he didn't want that fuck-ass family, and that was the word he used, to get any gratification from her at all. Nothing. And so they cremated her. And my grandfather gave her one last mitzvah. He said, if I'm going to give her one last gift, is the gift that she wanted. She always wanted to see the world. So he went all over Texas, basically, because he could ride the rail race for free because he worked for the Santa Fe Railroad. And he sprinkled parts of her in parts of Texas. So wherever you go in parts of Texas, there's a piece of her there. So I think that was really, really sweet. But anyway, yeah, Alisha was a girl that he did not want to bring up very much. He told me in the car on our way home, he says, you better not bring this girl up to your dad, to your mom, to your brother, to your uncle, and damn well not my wife. Do you understand me? I said, yes, sir. He says, no, I'm being serious. Look in my eyes. I said, I won't. Your secret's safe with me. He says, thank you. So we never talked about her. So very rarely did we ever bring that woman up. But I think for my grandfather, the way that I get to hear about his life is so interesting because, he beat the hell out of 5 priests, not just 2. He beat the hell out of a few of them. The first one he beat the hell out of, he was 17 years old. The second one he beat the hell out of, I think he was going to be 18 that year. He was still 17. And then the third one he beat the hell out of, I think he was 20. And the fourth one he beat the hell out of, he was about 31. And then the fourth one he beat the hell out of, he was 32. And then the fifth one he beat the hell out of, he was about almost 40. So he had to, now you must understand about my grandfather, that he did not just beat the hell out of these men, okay? There were good reasons for them, I promise. He had conversations with these men beforehand. Now, when my grandfather told you to do something and you didn't do it, and he finds out that you didn't do it, and he knows that you didn't, honey, he's not going to ask you to repeat what he told you not to do. He's going to ask you if you know God because you're about to meet him, okay? So, violence, maybe, but that was him sometimes. He always told me, do never use violence as an answer unless it is absolutely necessary. And I asked him, how do you know? He says, oh, baby, you'll know. You'll know. So, was my grandfather a man of God? No. Was he a good man? Absolutely. He loved that girl no matter what. I mean, the fact that he would beat the hell out of her own family, to basically tell them to stop, And I remember we saw her brother once. Later. I was about 12, maybe 12, 13. And we saw him at Albertsons, surprisingly. And my grandfather told me to get behind him. And I said, well, he just get behind me now. So I did. And I saw said arrow in his hand. Now, the arrow that we discussed is not a long arrow. So it's not like one of those bow and arrows that you see. It was very, very thin, very like this. It was very, very small. But it looked sharp as hell. It looked like it could kill you. And I could just see these men just stare at each other and not say a word. And I just poked my head around, and he looked at me. And I kind of looked at him like, you want to pull up? Like you want to pull up right outside Albertsons, baby? Let's go. Let's have a nice old, beating. But no, they didn't say anything much to each other. They just looked at each other, and they just, left. And then the arrow disappeared. So it was interesting that my grandfather could see things and do things that other people couldn't. But yet that I could see things and do things that he couldn't. So it was really kind of cool the way that things happened with him, and he's been dead for the past 15 years, and I'm now getting to read all these stories as he wrote them out, and they're all true because they all mention people who I know, and it's sad that I don't get to see his side of the family at all. It sucks. It really is fucking sad. Like, I told my dad that the other day. I said, look, I'm so, like, it's upsetting to me. Like, we don't see Dan's family. We don't, like, the last time I saw Dan was 2016. Dan is 90-something years old. You know, Gwen died in 2016, and we don't even see her family, like, at all. Betty's side of the family sucks, and Sue, I mean, her side of the family kind of sucks too, because her son sucks. So it's like, everybody sucks, and it's sad. Even though Dan's side of the family are very, very lovely people, and so are Gwen's, it's just we don't get a chance to see them because they're not here. Betty's side is messy, it was bad, and we did not leave it on a good note. And Sue, I mean, she had a son who sucks, so I don't know what to say about it. And it's just really fucking sad that my dad is the only one left, technically, of his family. And it's me that is having to kind of handle all these things at one time. And, you know, seeing pictures of, you know, said people that, you know, my dad has no idea who they are. And I know exactly who they are. Like, I'm looking at them when he wrote the letter A on the back of a picture with 27, like the number 27-48. I know what he meant by that. I know. And all these pictures of her, you don't really see his face because he's kissing her in all these pictures. And I think, oh, cute. You know, such a romantic photo. You know, but my dad's like, these are not Granny. And I'm like, no, this was before. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, Grandpa had one girlfriend that we know of that he loved very much that died. And it was very sad for him. And I don't think he ever really got over it, but at the same time, he met my grandmother about a few years later. So, needless to say, he was fine. But in the back of his mind, you know, he would tell me sometimes, you know, we would drive by this house, and I wouldn't understand why, and then finally he took me, and I went in the house, and I had that experience, and, you know, that was a whole thing. But I think for me, it's just going home. You know, the last time I was there, it was April of this year, and I drove by the lot when, you know, Kevin was in the hotel and he was sleeping, so I drove, and I took the car out there, and I drove, and they had tore the house down, and I could see her, and she was in the field, and kind of, she went, you know, so she's free there, you know, but sadly, the shed back in the back is still there, sadly. But I don't know if that's going to be torn down or not. But the house itself is gone, and I think she's thrilled about that because that was not a good place for her. And, you know, so I would drive home, and, you know, I drove by Lake Worth where the woman in the lake story was there about, you know, the ghost in the lake, which I thought was really cool. And then I would drive by, you know, the cathedral, and I just sense things there. It's so weird. And I just drove all over these places where he was, and I just could just sense him there, every place. And it was just so cool. It was just so cool. The fact that I do not know how to shoot a pistol, I still need to figure out how to shoot fast. Because I saw him do it. He went, just like, he taught me how to shoot a gun, a rifle, when I was 12. And that backfired, you know, because I shot in it, it backed me. He said, baby, I think we're going to stick with pistols for you, baby. Small guns would work for you, baby. And so that's what he did. But my grandfather was just a man who just was such a mysterious person. Such a mysterious person. And I loved him so dearly. And I just loved him. And I think he knew how much I loved him, because I was angry at God for so long. Because I told God, I said, if you take that man from me, I'll never forgive you. I told him that. I screamed that in the void. My grandfather was dying. I said, do not take this man from me. You already took my grandmother. Do not take him from me. And he didn't listen, obviously, because my grandfather was dead in less than a week. And I was angry. So, for so long, that how could he do this to me? How could my grandfather leave me? Like, he was the only person I could really tell things to or talk about things with, because he'd understand me. And now it's like I can't really do that with people unless I tell them I'm sorry if this will sound strange. My grandfather never told anybody of his secrets, I guess, or of his powers, as I like to call them. But I guess he knew that I knew, because I could see the same things that he saw, which was weird. And, you know, my granny did tell me he could see angels and demons, and I know so many people have told me people don't see angels. They don't really do that. I said, well, he did. My grandfather could see things that people would never even imagine. And no, he didn't have schizophrenia. He didn't hear these people all the time. They didn't tell him to do anything. They helped him more than anything. They saved his life so many times. And yet my grandfather was not a religious man. He always told me he was a man broken by God. That's what he told me. And I asked him what that meant. And he said, honey, it's hard to describe and it's hard to explain. But you'll soon find that out. What I mean.